It's the guard and the ghost. The fluorescent lights of cell block D hummed their endless song, and Officer Maya Chen stood at her post, watching a woman who looked like she'd already died. Inmate 47829, Samantha Reed, sat motionless on her bunk, staring at the concrete wall with eyes that held nothing but emptiness. Maya had seen that look before, on her own face in the mirror during the darkest months after her divorce, when she'd believed love was nothing but a beautiful lie people told themselves to survive. But there was something different about this woman, something that made Maya's breath catch every time she walked past that cell, something that felt like recognition, like looking into a mirror that reflected not her face but her soul. Samantha had been sentenced to 8 years for a crime Maya knew. Deep in her bones, she didn't commit. The file said embezzlement, but Maya had read between the lines, had seen the patterns of an abusive relationship, a controlling ex-husband, and a legal system that believed the man with money and power over the woman with bruises she'd learned to hide. For 3 months, Maya had watched Samantha fade, watched her stop eating, stop speaking, stop existing in any meaningful way. The other inmates whispered that she was a ghost, already gone, just waiting for her body to catch up. And Maya, who prided herself on professional distance, who'd built walls so high around her heart that nothing could scale them, found those walls crumbling every time she heard Samantha's name. It started with small things, the kind of kindness that could be explained away as simple human decency. Maya began leaving books on the meal cart, novels about women who survived impossible odds, stories of resilience and redemption. She never addressed them to Samantha directly, never acknowledged the way the books would disappear from the cart and reappear days later, carefully placed where Maya would find them. Then came the nights when Maya worked the graveyard shift, when the prison settled into an uneasy quiet and the only sounds were distant coughs and the shuffle of restless sleep. She would find herself standing outside Samantha's cell, close enough to hear her breathing, close enough to see the tears that fell silently down her face when she thought no one was watching. The first time they truly spoke, it wasn't planned. Maya had responded to a medical emergency 3 cells down, an inmate having a seizure, chaos erupting in the pre-dawn hours. When order was finally restored and the ambulance had taken the sick woman away, Maya found herself trembling with adrenaline and emotion, and without thinking, she stopped at Samantha's cell. The woman was sitting up, her eyes no longer empty but filled with something Maya recognized as concern, as humanity, as the first sign of life she'd seen in months. Maya whispered through the bars, asked if Samantha was okay, and the answer came back soft and clear, a voice unused to speaking but determined to be heard. Samantha said she was fine, but asked if Maya was, and in that moment, in that simple reversal of expected roles, something fundamental shifted between them. After that night, they began to talk. Maya would linger during her rounds, always professional, always careful, but allowing herself those few precious minutes when she could see Samantha as something more than an inmate number. They spoke about books at first, safe territory, discussions of characters and plots and themes. But slowly, like ice melting in spring, the conversations deepened. Samantha began to tell her story, the real story, about a marriage that had been a prison long before she'd ended up in this one, about a man who'd stolen not just money but her sense of self, who'd testified against her with tears in his eyes while his lawyers made her look like a monster. Maya listened with her heart breaking, understanding in ways she couldn't explain, feeling Samantha's pain as though it were her own. Maya shared her own truths in return, whispered confessions about her failed marriage, about the woman she'd once loved before fear and family pressure had forced her back into the closet, about the ways she'd buried herself so deep in her work that she'd forgotten what it felt like to actually feel anything. She told Samantha about the emptiness, about going through the motions of a life that didn't fit, about the moment she'd looked at her ex-husband and realized she was the one in prison, not the inmates she guarded. Samantha listened without judgment, without pity, only understanding, and Maya realized she was being seen, truly seen for the first time in her life. The friendship that grew between them was dangerous in every possible way. Maya knew the rules, knew that fraternization with inmates could cost her job, her pension, everything she'd worked for, but more than that, she knew what she was feeling went far beyond friendship. Far beyond the simple human connection she told herself it was. She was falling in love with an inmate, falling for a woman she could never touch, never hold, never build a life with. The realization came like thunder, sudden and overwhelming, during a routine lockdown when gang tensions had forced the entire block into isolation. Maya had checked on Samantha, found her curled on her bunk, and the look in those eyes, vulnerable and fierce, and full of something that looked like hope, had shattered every defense. Maya had left. Samantha felt it too. Maya could see it in the way her face lit up when Maya's shift began, in the way she'd position herself at the bars during rounds, maximizing their precious seconds of interaction. They never spoke of it directly, never acknowledged the electricity that crackled between them, the way their fingers would almost touch when Maya handed over library books, the way they'd stand too close during cell inspections, breathing the same air, existing in the same impossible moment. It was agony and ecstasy. This love that couldn't be named, couldn't be acted upon, could only exist in stolen glances and whispered conversations in the dead of night. The breaking point came 6 months into their unspoken relationship, when Samantha's appeal was denied. Maya found her sobbing, truly broken for the first time. All the strength and resilience that had slowly returned now shattered by the cold reality of 7.5 more years behind bars. Without thinking, operating purely on instinct and emotion, Maya reached through the bars and took Samantha's hand. It was a simple touch, hand to hand, skin to skin, but it carried the weight of everything they couldn't say, everything they couldn't be. They stood like that for minutes that felt like hours. Maya knowing cameras were watching, knowing this could end her career, and not caring, not when Samantha needed her, not when touch was the only language adequate for the moment. The consequences came swiftly. A supervisor had seen the footage, called Maya into the office, demanded explanations for behavior that crossed every line. Maya sat in that sterile room and made a choice that surprised even herself. She could have lied, could have manufactured excuses, could have thrown Samantha under the bus to save her career. Instead, she told the truth. Not all of it, not the depth of her feelings, but enough. She explained that Samantha was suffering, that she'd provided comfort to a human being in crisis, that she'd do it again because her job was to protect and serve. Even the incarcerated. The supervisor was unmoved, issued a formal warning, reassigned Maya to a different block, threatened termination if there was any further contact. The separation was worse than Maya could have imagined. She worked different hours now, on the other side of the facility, with no legitimate reason to go near cell block D. Days turned into weeks without seeing Samantha, without knowing if she was okay, if she was eating, if she'd slipped back into that ghost-like existence. Maya felt like she was suffocating, going through her shifts in a fog of grief for something she'd never really had, mourning a relationship that had only existed in the margins of what was allowed. She began making mistakes, showing up late, snapping at colleagues, coming apart at the seams in ways that terrified her because she'd always been the strong one, the reliable one, the one who had everything together. It was another officer, an older woman named Jean who'd worked at the prison for 20 years, who finally intervened. Jean had watched Maya deteriorate, had heard the rumors, had put together the pieces that everyone else was too blind or too callous to see. She pulled Maya aside one evening, spoke to her with a kindness that made Maya's carefully constructed composure finally collapse. Jean told her about her own story, about falling in love with a woman 30 years ago, when being gay could cost you everything, about making the choice between safety and truth, between survival and actually living. She told Maya that life was too short to love someone from a distance, too precious to waste on fear, and that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing weren't the same. Jean became Maya's unlikely ally. She worked cell block D and began carrying messages, small scraps of paper with Maya's words that she'd slipped to Samantha during meal distribution. The notes were simple at first, just checking in, making sure Samantha knew Maya hadn't forgotten her. But they evolved into love letters, raw and honest admissions of feelings that Maya had never allowed herself to voice. Samantha wrote back, her words equally passionate, equally desperate, speaking of nights spent dreaming of a future that seemed impossible, of a love that felt both like salvation and like the cruelest joke the universe had ever played. Maya began to formulate a plan, crazy and risky and probably doomed to fail, but a plan nonetheless. She started documenting everything she could find about Samantha's case, digging through legal records, tracking down witnesses who'd been too afraid to testify, building a case for innocence that should have been built years ago. She worked with a tenacity born of love and rage, anger at a system that had failed Samantha, at a world that made their love impossible, at every circumstance that kept them apart. She contacted legal aid organizations, pro bono lawyers, anyone who might listen to a prison guard who believed in an inmate's innocence with every fiber of her being. The investigation took 8 months. 8 months of Maya barely sleeping, of pouring every free moment into research and advocacy, of learning law and procedure and how to fight a system designed to resist fighting. Samantha's letters kept her going. Words of love and encouragement and disbelief that anyone would care this much, would sacrifice this much, would risk this much for her. Maya knew she was risking everything. Her job, her reputation, her financial security, but she also knew that letting Samantha languish for a crime she didn't commit while Maya stood by and did nothing would destroy her in ways unemployment never could. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Samantha's ex-husband, the man who'd orchestrated her downfall, had been arrested for fraud in a completely unrelated case. His new victims included his current wife, and she, in seeking revenge, had uncovered evidence of his systematic financial crimes, including the embezzlement he'd committed at the company where Samantha had worked and then framed her for. The evidence was damning, irrefutable, the kind of smoking gun that Maya's lawyer said could overturn Samantha's conviction. The legal process moved with agonizing slowness, but it moved. Months of motions and hearings and appeals, with Maya testifying about the evidence she'd uncovered, with Samantha's ex-husband's crimes laid bare for the world to see. And finally, on a cold morning in November, 22 months after that first conversation through the bars, a judge overturned Samantha's conviction, declared her factually innocent, ordered her immediate release. Maya was in the courtroom, had used vacation time to be there, and when Samantha walked out of that defendant's chair a free woman, their eyes met across the crowded room, and everything Maya had risked, everything she'd sacrificed, felt worth it. They didn't touch in the courtroom, didn't embrace in front of the cameras and the lawyers and the curious onlookers, but later, outside the courthouse, under gray November skies that looked like liberation, Samantha walked straight to where Maya stood waiting. They came together like magnets, like two halves of a whole that had been forcibly separated, and Maya felt Samantha's arms around her, felt her tears against her neck, felt the reality of this woman she loved finally free and in her arms. Maya held her tight, breathing in the scent of her, feeling her heartbeat, and whispered words she'd been holding back for almost 2 years. 3 simple words that carried the weight of everything they'd survived. I love you. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Maya had resigned from the prison, couldn't continue working there after everything that had happened, and was facing an uncertain future with no job lined up and savings running low. Samantha was starting over from nothing, her reputation destroyed, her career in finance over, facing the challenge of rebuilding a life after years of incarceration for a crime she didn't commit. But they were together, finally, truly, completely, and that made every challenge feel manageable, every obstacle feel temporary, every hardship feel like something they could weather as long as they had each other. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in love that transcends boundaries, if you've ever felt the courage it takes to choose truth over safety, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear that love is worth fighting for, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. They moved in together 3 months after Samantha's release. A small apartment with windows that let in actual sunlight, with doors that locked from the inside, with space that belonged to them and nobody else. Maya took a job as a counselor for formerly incarcerated individuals, using her experience and insight to help others navigate re-entry into a world that didn't make it easy. Samantha went back to school studying social work, determined to help others who'd been victimized by intimate partner abuse. They built a life together, quiet and normal and beautiful in its ordinariness, doing laundry and cooking, dinner and arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash. All the mundane magic of a love that had earned the right to be boring. On the anniversary of Samantha's release, they went back to the courthouse, stood on the steps where they'd first embraced, and Maya pulled out a small velvet box. She'd never imagined herself here, never thought she'd have the courage to love this openly, this honestly, this completely. But Samantha had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was loving despite the fear. It was choosing truth even when lies were safer. It was reaching through the bars even when you knew it might cost you everything. Before we end this story, if you felt the power of Maya and Samantha's journey, if their love inspired you to believe in second chances and the courage to fight for what's right, please leave a comment below sharing what this story meant to you or a time when you chose love over fear. Samantha said yes before Maya even finished asking, tears streaming down both their faces, and Maya slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook with joy and gratitude and overwhelming love. They were married 6 months later, surrounded by a small group of friends that included Jean, the officer who'd helped them through the darkest times, and Samantha's new legal team, the lawyers who'd fought for her freedom. It was a simple ceremony, nothing elaborate, just two women promising forever to each other, vowing to build a life on the foundation of all they'd survived. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. There were hard days, days when Samantha's trauma resurfaced, when Maya's guilt about the system she'd been part of became overwhelming, when the weight of what they'd endured felt too heavy to carry, but they carried it together, going to therapy, supporting each other, learning that love wasn't just the passionate moments but the choice to stay, to fight, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of who they'd been. They became advocates speaking at events about criminal justice reform, about the humanity of incarcerated individuals, about the importance of seeing people beyond their worst moments. Years later, when people asked Maya if she regretted risking everything for love, she would think back to that first night, to Samantha sitting in her cell like a ghost, to the moment their hands first touched, to every impossible obstacle they'd overcome. She would think about the life they'd built, the love they'd fought for, the way Samantha still looked at her every morning like she was something precious and miraculous. And Maya would smile, would reach for Samantha's hand, would feel the gold band on her finger, and would answer without hesitation that she'd never regretted a single moment, because loving Samantha had taught her what it meant to truly live, and living with Samantha made every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of fear worth it 1,000 times over.